Far more than we think. Making Sense of Spirituality by Angelo. Chapter 53. Adam Ant. When I do watch TV these days, I tend to watch programs on history or science, or my particular favourite, which is the natural world. I recently watched a documentary about ant colonies and was struck by the potential parallels with humankind. As individuals, ants are pretty ineffective in the grand scheme of things, but when they act together as a single unit, they transform themselves into a significant force. For example, an ant colony is able to repel the attentions of a bear, or compete with cattle for limited resources on the grasslands of South America. The reason is simply that by cooperating with each other and working for the collective good, they are able to punch way above their weight. All of the behaviour of an ant is geared towards selflessly contributing to the success of the colony, rather than selfishly doing its own thing. The ant can be thought of as acting from spirit rather than ego. We may conclude, of course, that the ant doesn't know any better and hence blindly follows its biological instincts. We might also think the life of an ant is mundane and pointless compared to our existence. As human beings, we're blessed with far greater capabilities than ants, so we think we know better. We have the intellect to be able to decide whether we want to act naturally from spirit or if we want to do our own thing and act from ego. The gift of choice turns out to be our downfall, because the vast majority of us have chosen the ego option, and hence we experience the consequences. Ants are thought to have evolved from wasps some 100 million years ago, and they are a hugely successful insect, with more than 1,000 species and a global population of countless billions. They are social insects that live in colonies, sometimes numbering hundreds of thousands, but often in vast interconnected networks with numbers running into hundreds of millions. They build incredibly complex nests with multiple chambers for hatching and raising their young, food storage, garbage disposal, and rest and relaxation. These structures even have built-in temperature and humidity controls in the form of tunnels and air vents. Typically there will be one or more queens whose job it is to lay eggs, and then all of the other ants have differing attributes and jobs covering such things as building and repairing the nest, caring for the queen and the young, searching for and gathering food, and defending the colony against predators. Some species have further subdivisions of skills, such as the cutters and transport ants within leafcutter ant colonies. The nests form the central hub, but there are then networks of pathways leading to external food supplies that can stretch up to 300 meters away. Some species even manage little herds of tiny creatures, such as aphids or mealybugs, in order to provide a secure source of sugar honey. All of this cooperation takes place using what seems to be a rudimentary form of communication based on vibrations and chemical signals. They are able to adapt to external threats and environmental changes, and even completely relocate the whole colony, all without any dictatorial or democratically elected leadership. They instinctively know what to do in any situation, because the overriding driver for any decision or action is the common welfare of the colony. The resilience and success of these little guys is truly amazing, and the whole self-organizing system is based on cooperation, which in turn relies on communication. Without these two essential ingredients, the ants could not survive or thrive in this ever-changing world. This is all very interesting, but there's also an important point to note. We can see the ant is an individual insect, but we can also observe the whole colony as a living superorganism. In many respects, it's the colony that is the living thing, with the individual ants as simply the equivalent of living cells within the organism. This is exactly the theme that we covered in the earlier chapter on oneness. You can imagine what would happen within an ant colony if ants behaved the same way as human beings do. If all ants considered themselves as separate individuals within the colony and acted in their own selfish interests. If groups of ants got together and tried to exploit more vulnerable ants. If competing groups developed their own ideologies and then tried to impose those ideas onto other groups. If ants fought with each other and killed each other simply because they thought their way was the right way. If groups of ants all voted for a leader and then complained bitterly if that leader followed his own agenda rather than representing the group. If certain ants took ownership of obscenely unfair and unnecessarily large proportions of the collective food supply, and so on. The ants would have taken a beautiful, self-organizing, cooperative system and turned the whole thing into a chaotic and unworkable nightmare. The more they tried to fix it, the worse it would get. It would seem that there was no workable solution, so each ant would look out for itself at the expense of the others. The old instinctive cooperative behaviour will be long forgotten and life will become a fearful experience based mainly on individual survival. The ants would have taken a heavenly colony and turned it into a hellish existence. And in addition to the negative individual experiences, the colony itself would suffer greatly and would probably eventually collapse and die, taking every single ant down with it. If we raise our perspective and see the human race as a single superorganism living on a lump of rock which is orbiting a sun, which is itself presumably orbiting something else, the parallels with the ant colony are very real indeed. The human race is threatening its own existence by fighting amongst itself rather than seeing the bigger picture. We identify passionately with our nations, religions, local cultures, companies, sports teams and causes, but these are in reality all just subsets of the bigger picture. We are all individual cells within the living organism that is humankind. We are all part of the same thing, and we are all one. We have created the problems of this crazy world through ego, and we will never solve them by trying to impose our ideas and solutions onto others. Not one of us has an answer that is going to be acceptable to everyone. Politics based on democracy is flawed because there will always be winners and losers, so there will never be selfless cooperation. The ego of humankind has created an unsolvable, life-threatening crisis for itself. Any proposed solution based on ego will fail because it's the collective and individual ego that is the cause of the problem. The ant colony of humanity is doomed to self-destruct sooner or later unless each individual ant wakes up to what is happening and decides to adopt a more natural, selfless system of cooperation. If each ant waits for all the other ants to do the same thing, nothing will happen. We will have ego gridlock. The only realistic solution that I can see is for some courageous ants to see the bigger picture and lead by example. Each ant that chooses to live as unconditional love will slowly influence the others to do the same, and gradually the whole colony will return to sanity. This seems to be the only way out of the mess that we perpetuate. An ant colony is part of a much larger ecosystem, and the colony itself plays a part in the vastly bigger picture of life on Earth. The colony is not separate from the natural world, but is an integral part of it. In some ways it adds value, and in other ways it consumes resources. But overall, an ant colony is perfect in its existence just by being as it is. The colony performs its natural function, and all is well. This is the mindset that we as humankind seem to have lost. We are not separate from nature, but part of it. We may be at the top of the food chain, but that does not make us superior or more important. We are simply part of all that is. We are part of everything and connected to everything. We are an expression of life, but we are not the sole reason for it. Life on Earth will go on, with or without this latest version of humankind. A fabled ant called Adam ate the forbidden fruit of ego a long, long time ago, and chose himself in favour of the colony. Humankind has been living with the hellish consequences ever since. There is a potential way out, but it will need each of the cells in the human superorganism to play its part. Some will want to, and others will not. But all we can do individually is return to our own natural state of spirituality. This will be of benefit to everyone else, and in so doing we will benefit ourselves.